Have you ever stopped to think about how the exact same universe that dictates the orbit of massive planets also perfectly governs the splitting of your microscopic cells? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into the micro and macro rulebook to decode nature's laws. It's going to be a fascinating ride, so let's just jump right in.
Okay, here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll hit the rules of nature, check out the branches of physics, and then zoom into the blueprint of life. After that, we'll walk through the stages of meiosis, look at what happens when biological rules break, and finally wrap up with modifying your health risks.
Starting off with Section 1, the rules of nature, a pragmatic set of rules.
To get us grounded, let's look at this beautifully simple quote from our source material. It says, "Nature is described as a pragmatic set of rules followed by all the things around us." I just love that. It reminds us that physics isn't just random, chaotic stuff happening. It's the science of exploring these fundamental, incredibly strict rules that actually have this gorgeous underlying simplicity to them.
And to decode all these rules, physicists generally team up into two collaborative camps. You've got your theoretical physicists. They're kind of like the architects. They observe nature, take what we know, and use intense math to draft up theories and solve mysteries. Then, on the flip side, you have the experimental physicists. They're the builders. They're the ones out there rigorously testing those mathematical blueprints with actual physical experiments. It's a pretty amazing tag team.
Moving right along to Section 2, the branches of physics, expanding the scope.
So to make sense of everything, physics breaks the universe down into some incredibly distinct branches. You've got mechanics, which handles motion and gravitation. Thermodynamics, which is all about heat, temperature, and energy. Then there's electricity and magnetism, mapping out charges and magnetic fields. And finally, atomic physics, which dives deep, deep down into the structure of the atom. And honestly, that last one is the perfect bridge to take us right to the doorstep of biology.
Which brings us to Section 3, the blueprint of life, rules at the microscale.
Okay, zooming all the way in from atomic physics, we hit a super strict biological rulebook known as meiosis. This is basically the ultimate cell division process for generating life. In animals, meiosis happens in the germ cells, and it's the exact mechanism that creates sperm in males and the ovum or egg in females. Now, once that ovum is produced, its safe transport is absolutely crucial. Seriously, the transport of the ovum is the vital next step, an absolute prerequisite for fertilization to even happen. Without this incredibly strict cellular rulebook, the continuation of life literally wouldn't happen.
Let's check out Section 4, the stages of meiosis, step-by-step division.
So, how does this actually work? Well, in the normal course of meiosis, homologous chromosomes, basically matching chromosome pairs, carefully pair up and then separate toward opposite ends of the cell. This is a big deal because it ensures the resulting gametes end up with exactly half the normal number of chromosomes, getting them perfectly prepped for that magic moment of fertilization.
To get that perfect separation, the cell goes through some highly choreographed substages. First up is zygote. This is where a process called synapsis kicks in. Think of it kind of like two halves of a zipper perfectly coming together. Chromosomes from the mother and father are literally attracted to each other and pair up lengthwise to form what we call a bivalent.
Right after that, we slide into the Pachytene stage. Here, the synaptic forces holding them together start to decrease, so the chromosomes begin to uncoil and pull apart. But, and this is key, they don't completely detach. They stay tethered together almost like they're holding hands at very specific contact points called chiasmata.
Then, as the cell moves into metaphase 1, those bivalents we just talked about line up perfectly along the equatorial plane, basically the middle of the cell. Newly forming microtubules in the cytoplasm swoop in and attach to the centromeres, getting ready to pull these genetic blueprints apart. I mean, it is an absolute masterpiece of biological engineering.
Now you might be wondering, why does this strict, non-negotiable process matter so much? Well, first off, after the successful transport of the ovum, fertilization happens when it meets the sperm, and this flawlessly restores the full diploid number of chromosomes, half from mom, half from dad, making a perfect, complete set. Second, by crossing over at those hand-holding contact points we mentioned earlier, meiosis creates genetic variation. And that variation, it is literally the raw material for evolution across all species. It's wild.
Section 5, when biological rules break, meiotic errors. This leads us to a pretty critical question.
what actually happens if this incredibly delicate separation process goes wrong or just doesn't happen at all? Well, if normal meiosis fails, the number of chromosomes would just keep doubling with every single generation. That would cause massive abnormal growth, totally skew species characteristics, and to be honest, it's usually fatal.
One specific error we see is called non-disjunction. This happens when a pair of homologous chromosomes just straight up fails to separate during meiosis I. The result? You get gametes with an abnormal number of chromosomes, either too many or too few. If one of those abnormal gametes manages to fuse with a normal one during fertilization, the new zygote is unfortunately going to carry that abnormal number, which leads to some really severe genetic disorders.
And finally, Section 6, Modifying Your Health Risks, the rules we control.
So far, we've talked about these unbending, strict genetic rules. But let's zoom back out to the macroscopic human level for a second. Because when it comes to our overall health, especially cardiovascular health, we actually have a massive say in writing the rules. Health risks fall pretty cleanly into two buckets. You've got non-modifiable factors, which are the rules we just can't change, like our age, biological sex, race, or family history. But then you have the modifiable factors. We absolutely 100% control things like our diet, whether we exercise or sit around all day, if we smoke, how we manage stress, and our alcohol consumption. We actually have the power to write this part of our biological rulebook.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought for this explainer. You now know just how incredibly strictly nature enforces its rules, right? From the macro physics of the entire universe, all the way down to the micro pairing of chromosomes to create the ovum, transport it safely, and allow for fertilization. Knowing all of this, how are you going to choose to play the game with your own health today? What modifiable choices will you change to protect this absolutely incredible biological machine you've been given? Thanks so much for exploring these wild concepts with me today.